Dear Amberlanders, greetings to Amberlanders in the USA, in Europe, in Africa, and in the world, in Dubai, and Asia. In fact, greetings to all Amberlanders in the whole world. So this morning, I'll be giving you a timeline overview of big and small events in the history of Cameroon, so that we should know exactly how our country originated and what to aspire for. So, in 500 BC, that's 500 before Christ, the explorer, whose name was Hanno, from Carthage, in Carthage is a city in North Africa, that's specifically in Tunisia. He was the first foreigner who reported to have seen Mount Cameroon. And in that century, they only knew about slave trade, and goods too also came from northern Nigeria and across the Sahara to North Africa. So in 200, from between 200 and 100 before Christ, between 200 and 100 BC, the first tribes that inhabited Cameroon were the Bantus. The Bantu tribes immigrate to Cameroon from northern Nigeria. These Bantu-speaking tribes were traditionally agriculturalists, requiring lots of farmland. The original inhabitants, the so-called the Pygmies, gradually forced themselves deeper into the forest when the newcomers, when the Bantus came in from northern Nigeria to inhabit or to occupy Cameroon. The Sao culture developed in an area in the south of Lake Chad, and more than 150 different ethnic groups inhabit or have occupied Cameroon, which today is about 250 different tribes. So, the Europeans arrived in Cameroon in 1472. So, in 1472, the first European who arrived Cameroon was a Portuguese. He was on expedition. His name was Fernando Po, and he reached the coast of Cameroon. They reached Douala. The first city they reached first was Douala. Then they sailed up to the Wuri River. Then the name Wuri, they changed the name from the Wuri to Rio dos Cameros, the river of prawns. And that is where our name Cameroon originated from. With the arrival of Europeans, they focused on slave trades and they shifted mostly to the coastal areas. Okay, the local chiefs on the coast increased their power by making agreements with the Portuguese. Then deals were also made with traders from England, Holland, France, and Germany. The chiefs served as middlemen between Europeans and the upcountry tribes with something to sell. Mostly slaves and ivory were what the chiefs provided for sale. So slaves were some of us who were given out for slave trade, were sold for slave trade. Then what we had was ivory, and so ivory is these horns that came from which animal? It should be some ornaments that come from an animal. Then the Europeans brought mostly cloth and metal products. They brought mainly cloth and metal products in exchange of ivory and slaves. And you know, slaves are people, they are human beings. So that the slaves should go and work for them to provide them cheap labor. So in 1520, a few Portuguese settled and started plantation in the transatlantic area, and they were doing mostly through slave trade. The pastoral nomads, because pastoral nomads are these people, especially the Mboruros, who moved from place to place with their cattle. So these pastoral nomads were still immigrating from Nigeria again, and as far as these people migrated from Nigeria into Cameroon, our pygmies went further into the forest, because at that time Cameroon was made up of only pygmies lived in Cameroon. So as these pastoral nomads moved from Nigeria to Cameroon, the pygmies moved deep into the forest, further into the forest. Then the constant fight for territory continued to produce refugees to be sold for slave trade. Then in 1600, the Dutch took over this slave trade in Cameroon. When we talk of the Dutch, we are talking of the Germans. And the British in 1700, the British missionaries started protesting against the sale of slave trades in Cameroon. The London Baptist Missionary Society created a Christian colony in Victoria, which today is known as Limbe, and the first inhabitants of Limbe were freed slaves from Jamaica, Ghana, Liberia, and also other African countries who converted to Christianity. Those are the people who first of all settled in Limbe, in our Victoria, which is today known as Limbe. They were from Jamaica, from Ghana, and from Liberia, and other Africans who converted from the Muslim religion to the Christian religion. They are the ones who first settled in Limbe. Then in the 1700s, the British missionaries, okay, let's move up to the 1863. In 1863, the slavery was abolished in America. Thus, Americans decided to abolish this slavery. They refused taking more slaves from Africa, from Cameroon, into their continent. Then the European nations who have done this for several years, who have been taking Africans as slaves for several years, continued at the back doors again for some time. Then in 1845, trade between Cameroon and Europe gradually changed and developed. The first larger European settlers founded by the English Navy engineer and missionary Alfred Secker. So Alfred Secker started building schools and churches in Douala at the mouth of the Wuri River. And in 1858, Alfred Secker found the first European settlement in Victoria. He saw great strategic financial possibility in the settlement and tried to convince the English government to make areas for a crown colony in Cameroon. When the slavery finally died out, trade changes to natural resources like palm oil, ivory, and gold. The Europeans started moving deeper into the country, and as a result, the Douala chiefs lose some of their influences. The king of Douala, who was Douala Mangabel, wrote to Queen Victoria inviting England to form an official relationship with Douala. When he was told about British post in Lagos, Nigeria, the British Queen and government have their hands full in Nigeria, means they occupied Nigeria fully. Then East Africa and other places in the world too were occupied by the British. Then they were reluctant in making Cameroon a British protectorate. As a result of the hesitation, the Germans won the territory Cameroon, which we have today. So since the British hesitated in 1884, the Germans won this territory and took over. So in 1886, the European colonial powers divided Africa between them at a conference in Berlin. So in the Berlin Conference, they what happened in the Berlin Conference? Um, Gustav Nachtigal signed a treaty with the chiefs of Douala on behalf of the German Kaiser William in return for trade advantages. The chiefs accepted a German protectorate. The names of the chiefs, Bel, Aqua, Daido, lived on in Cameroon today. So in 1886, the European colonial powers divided Africa between them at a conference in Berlin. And the Europeans, in this conference, the Europeans agreed to the new borders for the entire African continent. The borders are drawn without considering differences in culture and language for the inhabitants. In 1885, Baron von Soden becomes governor of the new German colony Cameroon. His biggest task was fighting rebellious tribes inside the country. Then in 1888, the explorer George Zenker found the German settlement in the mountains, later developed to the capital of Yaoundé. So in 1907, the second German governor, von Puttkamer, constructed a railway into the country with brutally and forced labor. He also started developing the colony with roads, schools, and hospitals. The major town changed from the Cameroon state to Douala. In 1914, Chief Rodolphe Douala Mangabel and military officer Martin Paul Samba, two early nationalists, resisted the German power and they executed their rule over the German powers. It means they defeated and conquered the German powers in 1914. And what happened next? The British and French Cameroon now came in. In 1916, the World War I broke out, putting a temporary stop to the development of German colony. As a result of the war and battles in Cameroon, Britain and French finally forced Germany out of the territory. And what happened next? In 1919, following the war, a declaration split up Cameroon between Britain and France. The border was drawn roughly following the line of mountains. The administrative and linguistic division of the country has been the cause of tension and problems up till today, and this is what we are still fighting for. Administration in Britain Cameroon stopped the use of forced labor, thereby also slowing down the development of the area. French Cameroon continued to use forced labor until 1945. In 1992, Cameroon is now officially shared between Britain and France. France now occupied the largest area and Britain kept the area bordering their colony in Nigeria, British Southern Cameroons, and that's in Nigeria, British Cameroons and Nigeria are now being administered as one colony, but British attention effort went to develop Nigeria. Then the British Cameroon was neglected and German settlers returned to Victoria, making private plantations. The French colony continued to grow with infrastructure, a bigger port in Douala, and more export, but the brutal French rule also became increasingly unpopular. In 1924, the first president of Cameroon, Alhaji Amadou Ahidjo, was born in Garoua, that's in northern Cameroon. So Amadou Ahidjo was born in 1924 in Garoua. In 1930, many German settlers joined their plantation and businesses in support of the Nazi Germany. In February 13, 1933, the second president of Cameroon, Paul Biya, was born in Vomeka. So Paul Biya was born on February 13, 1933. And in 1939 to 1940, as World War II broke out, all German plantations were confiscated. In 1945, the British and French mandates to Cameroon colony were renewed by the United Nations after World War II. The British Cameroon continued to be ruled by Nigeria. In 1947, the confiscated German plantations were made into Cameroon Development Corporation, the CDC, which remain till today. And that is the largest, and that remains one of the largest companies in Cameroon. Okay, let's talk about independence. After World War II, political parties started to emerge in both the French and British sector of Cameroon. Most of them demanded independence, and some parties wanted the two parts of the Cameroon to be united. Other movements in British Cameroon sought to join the English-speaking Cameroons, and that's the Nigerian state. In 1955, a revolt started in the major towns of French Cameroon. The uprising was organized by Union de Population Camerounaise, UPC, Union de Population Camerounaise, UPC, and the revolt put down the French with the loss of several hundred lives and massive destruction in the towns. Obviously, this event also triggered more violence by the UPC and a growing demand for independence. In 1958, the UPC was banned by French government. The party continued as an illegal freedom movement. In 1958, Amadou Ahidjo formed the party L'Union Camerounaise. He became the Prime Minister of the Assemblée Législative du Cameroun. He worked closely with the French system, but he called for complete independence and reunification of the two Cameroons in October 1961. A unique referendum in British Cameroon was carried out with the support of the United Nations. The northern part of the British Cameroon voted to join Nigeria, while the southern part wanted to join the French-speaking Cameroon. The will of the referendum was respected, though disagreements still existed. From 1961 to 1963, frequent riots and uproar were stopped with the help from the French military. The United Republic of Cameroon came in on May 20th, 1972. The federal structure was dissolved and a new constitution was made with the formation of the United Republic of Cameroon. In 1973, saxophone play that's not important. With the success of Amadou Ahidjo in 1970, he developed agriculture in Cameroon and then focused on industry. The development, together with the discovering of oil, way for economic and political stability in Cameroon. The country was rich on natural resources like oil, cocoa, coffee, timber, petrol, and it had fertile soil. Cameroon was doing better than most of the neighboring countries and favorite to the European government. Human rights abuses and political arrests were mostly ignored, tolerated by Amadou Ahidjo. Like many other African presidents, they started clinging to the power and became unwilling to make way for reforms and true democracy, and corruption grew in Cameroon. So Amadou Ahidjo stepped down in November 1982 without prior notice because he complained of an illness. He was sick. The 49-year-old Prime Minister Paul Biya took over President Amadou Ahidjo and worked close together with Amadou Ahidjo because at that time his reputation was like honest and they deemed him to be competent. But in 1983, the old colonial town of Victoria got its current name, Limbe. In 1983, Victoria became Limbe. 1983, the people of Cameroon started seeing a new side of Obia, which emerged with his increased power. The prime minister and several others in the government were fired. They were said to have plotted against him. Amadou Ahidjo moved to an exile in France after similar accusations from the presidential office. Okay, the old colonial town of Limbe got its current name, and the seaside was developed. And what happened from his